Well, my name is David Warther, and my grandfather was Mooney Warther, who carved the steam engines, the history of the steam engine. I was a little kid, my grandpa was alive and well, and I started carving little miniature ships, and my grandfather encouraged me, and this is what's become of that, is the exhibit that we have today. Currently I'm working on ship number 89. My grandfather did a lot to inspire me into doing the work that I'm doing. It was something that I had a natural interest in doing from when I was really little, and I looked up to my grandfather. He had carved all of those steam engines, and my grandfather was quite a colorful character. So I admired my grandfather greatly, and then as I started carving, he encouraged that, and so that led me all the more into doing more of that carving. My mom just passed away a little over a year ago, and when she passed on, she gave me a little carving that I made when I was 4 years old. So that's actually when I started making things, was at age 4. I started carving with the sailing ships when I was 6 years old. So those were the beginning years. I started carving ships for a very unusual reason. Actually, what happened was when I was a little kid, when I was 6 years old, I was accustomed to going into my dad's workshop every morning. There was a shop in our house, in the basement of our home. And I would go in there every day and I would work on something. And I went in there one day, and I remember it very plainly. There was a little piece of scrap wood that had fallen off my dad's workbench onto the floor. And I scooped it up and I was ready to throw it away. And I looked at it before I threw it away. And I said to myself, this looks like a ship. I can make a ship out of this. And when we're children, we see things quite easily. Our imaginations are very vivid. So I saw a ship in that little piece of wood and I worked to make it into a ship. And that started the process, I guess you would say. I've literally had a ship on my workbench ever since. I was just thrilled making that ship, thrilled with the results. I carved today in the same spirit I started off with when I was a kid, very excited about everything. It wasn't until I was a senior in high school that I started carving the ships from blueprints and drawings. And so my carvings that I have now, the 88 carvings that I have now, are all on scale, all made from blueprints to be accurate carvings of real ships. The carving process for a ship begins with the hull of the ship. And of course it starts with the blueprint, but the actual physical work starts with the hull. The hull of every carving that I make is a solid piece of antique ivory. I shape the outside of the ship first. This is done with saws and files. I sand the ivory with sandpaper. Ivory sands very nicely. I polish the ivory with buffing wheels to bring up that high luster. Once the hull is made, then I hollow out that ship. Not very deep, just deep enough to put the deck down into that cavity. The deck is a separate piece of ivory. Once the deck is in the cavity, then I start building up all the deck detail. And finally I go on to the masting and rigging. Of course, unlike a model kit that you buy, I'm making all of these parts from scratch. And ivory doesn't glue well, so I don't glue the parts into place. All the parts are pinned and fitted into place with miniature ivory pegs. I have two ships in particular that I think are better carvings. One ship I made at age 30, and that was called the Carnegie. It's a scientific research ship. The other ship I made just a few years ago, about 7 years ago, and it's called the Lacey. And it was a medieval ship from Italy, from Genoa, Italy, from the year 1370. It's just a very elegant medieval ship. Likewise, the modern research vessel is very elegant, very pretty. You never know what the future is. I'm 60 years old, and at this point, it doesn't look like other family members are going to be taking an interest. Our kids never took an interest in this carving, and that's not a heartache or a regret or any problem. It's something they decided not to go into. And so at this point, we don't have any grandchildren old enough to see if they might have an interest in this. At this point, I would say that this would be the end of the work. But more importantly, when my grandfather was 60 years old, if you would have asked him that same question, he would have said, this is where it stops, because his children and none of his grandchildren at that time showed any interest in carving. And then years later, I was born and I took an interest, and here we are. So at this point, at age 60, I say, no, it doesn't look like it, but hopefully there will be somebody coming down the road later on that might have an interest in working with their hands like this.